Are there universal laws of minds? Turns out there might be. The first clue is this: minds don't just react, they predict. Your brain is constantly guessing what's about to happen. What word comes next, where the ball will land, how someone might respond. It doesn't wait for reality, it prepares for it. This is the foundation of what scientists call predictive processing. At the core of predictive processing is an idea borrowed from probability theory, Bayes' theorem. It's a rule for updating beliefs in light of new evidence. Your mind does this effortlessly. It holds expectations, priors, and adjusts them as the world feeds back new information. If your brain expects silence but hears a loud bang, it quickly revises its model of the moment. This process, prediction, error, correction, is happening constantly, even as you read this. From this loop emerges something powerful: efficiency. The brain doesn't waste energy processing every detail from scratch. It fills in gaps, glosses over redundancies, smooths over noise. That's why you don't notice the blind spot in your vision, or why you sometimes mishear a sentence and only realize it seconds later. The mind is working ahead, stitching coherence on the fly. Another near-universal law is the tendency to seek patterns even when none exist. From constellations in the stars to faces in clouds, the brain tries to impose order. Pattern recognition is so core to our thinking that it underlies everything from reading to relationships. It's what helps us predict outcomes, anticipate danger, and find meaning in chaos. But it's not perfect. These mental shortcuts, what psychologists call heuristics, are fast and often helpful, but they also create predictable distortions: confirmation bias, availability bias, anchoring. These aren't random errors. They're systematic tendencies baked into the architecture of how minds simplify complexity. Even emotions follow rules. Across cultures, certain expressions, fear, joy, disgust, show up the same way. Emotional responses are not just feelings, they are data. They inform decisions, prioritize attention, and encode memory. In this way, emotion behaves like a regulatory system, weighting experiences, adjusting focus, shaping behavior. Then there's memory. It doesn't store events like a hard drive. It compresses, edits, reconstructs. Your mind remembers not what happened, but what was meaningful. And meaning is governed by attention, emotion, and relevance, laws that apply across individuals and even across species. So are there universal laws for the mind? Not in the way physics has equations, but there are principles, loops, biases, tendencies that appear again and again: prediction, compression, pattern seeking, error correction. These aren't quirks of individual minds. They're signatures of how minds make sense of the world. And the more we understand those rules, the more we begin to see thought not as a mystery, but as a process, a system, a rhythm, one that runs in us, through us, and perhaps beyond us. What are the limits of mind? We often speak about the power of the mind, how it imagines, predicts, solves, creates. But just as important is what it can't do, where it falters, where it reaches the edge of understanding and quietly stops. There are perceptual limits. You don't see all colors. You don't hear all frequencies. Your brain fills in visual blind spots without telling you. Even your memories are reconstructions, not recordings. The world you experience is a version, not the full source code. There are cognitive limits. Your attention can only hold a few things at once. You can't focus on everything. You rely on shortcuts, called heuristics, to get through the day. These shortcuts are efficient, but they come with biases: confirmation bias, hindsight bias, anchoring. You see what fits. You ignore what doesn't. And then there are deeper limits. Structural ones. Boundaries that may never be crossed. In the 18th century, philosopher Immanuel Kant proposed something profound, that the mind doesn't just perceive the world, it shapes it. He divided reality into 3 layers: the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it; the noumenal world, the world as it exists on its own, beyond our perception; and the transcendental structures, the built-in mental filters that shape all experience. Kant argued that space and time themselves are not properties of the world out there, but of the mind itself. In other words, we don't just look through a lens, we live inside it. And that lens has edges. Modern science echoes this. Some physicists suggest our minds evolved not to see truth, but to see what helps us survive. That what we call reality is a user interface, like icons on a desktop. Useful, but not the full picture. Then there's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It showed that in any complex logical system, there will be truths that are real, but can't be proven within the system itself. What if the mind is such a system? What if some truths are beyond not just our current knowledge, but our capacity to ever know? This isn't defeatist, it's perspective. To know that the mind has limits is to understand what makes it precious. It shows us why mystery exists, not as a failure of reason, but as a horizon. So what are the limits of the mind? Some are biological, some are cognitive. Some may be baked into the very way perception works. But beyond every limit is a question, and beyond every question is the potential for humility, curiosity, and awe. The mind cannot grasp everything, but it can grasp that it cannot grasp everything, and that might be its deepest strength. What is the self, and is it an illusion? When you say I, who exactly are you talking about? It feels obvious. You're a person, a mind, a self. You remember your past. You think, you feel, you make choices. There's a sense of continuity, like you're the same person you were 5 years ago, just with more experiences stacked on top. But when we look closely, that feeling begins to blur. There's no single place in the brain where the self is stored. No central you sitting behind your eyes pulling the levers. Instead, identity seems to emerge from many systems working together. Memory, emotion, perception, attention, constantly syncing and reshaping. Some neuroscientists call it the default mode network, a set of regions in the brain that activate when you're not focused on the outside world. It's what constructs the inner monologue, the sense of autobiography. But that activity isn't constant. It changes, it flickers, and when it quiets, through meditation, psychedelics, trauma, or deep flow, the self can feel like it vanishes entirely. That's where things get strange. You can be fully conscious, fully aware, and yet feel no boundary between you and the world. People describe it as ego loss, self-dissolution, or simply presence. Not emptiness, just absence of the usual narrator. So if the self can disappear, what was it to begin with? Some philosophers argue that the self is a narrative, a story the mind tells itself to organize experience. You aren't a single unchanging identity, but a collection of roles, habits, values, memories, preferences, all stitched together by memory and language. And because the story feels coherent, it feels like a real thing. But coherence is not permanence. The you that you remember from childhood thought differently, spoke differently, wanted different things. Your body changed. Your thoughts evolved. Your values shifted. So did your relationships, your beliefs, your fears. So what exactly stayed the same? Maybe nothing. In Buddhism, this idea is central. There is no fixed self, only a process. The mind clings to identity because it craves stability. But in truth, the self is like a flame, a shape that appears continuous, even though the material fueling it is always changing. Does that mean the self is fake? Not quite. It means it's functional. The self helps you make decisions, tell stories, build memories, hold relationships. It's a mental interface, a useful simplification that lets you operate in a world too complex to grasp all at once. So what is the self? A pattern, a habit, a story, an ongoing negotiation between biology, experience, memory, and attention. And is it an illusion? Only if you think it's something solid, something permanent, something separate from everything else. Because the deeper you look, the more the self dissolves into the system that made it. Can one mind truly understand another? You've lived inside your mind every second of your life. You know its rhythms, its thoughts, its contradictions, its memories that rise at the wrong time. You feel the full weight of your experiences, not just as facts, but as felt realities. And yet, no one else will ever inhabit that space, just like you'll never truly inhabit theirs. We share words, gestures, even moments of silence that feel meaningful. We say, "I know how you feel," and sometimes we really try to mean it. But what we're doing is guessing, trying to map one mind onto another, using only the fragments we can observe from the outside. This is the heart of what philosophers call the problem of other minds. You can see someone smile, cry, or tremble, but you can't directly access the feeling behind it. You infer, you empathize, but at some level, the experience is theirs alone. Even language, our best tool for bridging minds, is built on translation. I say grief, and you think of your own version, but is it the same as mine? Or just something close enough to pass as understanding? And yet, we do connect. Mirror neurons in your brain light up when you see someone else act or feel pain. It's not just metaphor. You physically simulate what you observe. That's empathy, not as emotion, but as architecture. A body-level attempt to bridge the unbridgeable. Still, simulation isn't sameness. We don't merge. We reflect. We approximate. That's why misunderstandings happen even between people who love each other. Why you can feel lonely in a crowd. Why you can be perfectly articulate and still feel like no one truly gets it. But maybe full understanding was never the point. Maybe the goal isn't perfect translation, it's honest effort. The willingness to sit with someone else's experience without rushing to fix it or fully grasp it. Maybe understanding doesn't mean entering another mind. It means respecting its depth. Art tries to do this. Music, poetry, storytelling. They don't transfer experience directly, but they create echoes. They activate something familiar in someone else. Not a shared mind, but a shared resonance. So, can one mind truly understand another? Maybe not in totality, but it can try. It can listen. It can reflect. And in that attempt, it narrows the gap between inner worlds, even if just by a little. Because what matters most may not be perfect understanding. What matters is that someone else is trying to see you. And in that small act, the space between minds becomes something else entirely. Not a wall, but a bridge. Is there such a thing as objective truth? We like to think there is. But beneath all the noise, beyond opinion, emotion, culture, bias, there's a reality that simply is. Cold, clear, unchanging. A truth that doesn't care what we believe. But if that truth exists, how would we ever know we found it? Your mind doesn't see the world directly. It receives fragments, light hitting the retina, vibrations entering the ear, chemicals on the tongue. Those signals are interpreted, shaped, and stitched together into experience. What you see isn't the world, it's your brain's model of it. And that model is influenced by everything: memory, expectation, mood, culture, language, belief. Two people can look at the same moment and come away with different truths. One sees kindness, the other sees manipulation. One sees danger, the other sees adventure. Which is the truth? In philosophy, this tension lives between realism and constructivism. Realism says the truth is out there, independent of minds. Constructivism says truth is always filtered, constructed through perception, language, and thought. Maybe the world exists as it is, but we can only access it as it appears to us. Even science, our most rigorous tool for truth, works through models. It doesn't prove, it approximates. Gravity was once a force. Now it's a curve in space-time. Tomorrow, it might be something else. What we call truth is often just what hasn't been disproven yet. And then there's culture. In some languages, time flows left to right. In others, it flows east to west. Some cultures prioritize the group, others the individual. These aren't just preferences, they shape perception. Even what we notice gets filtered by what we believe matters. So, does this mean there's no objective truth? Not exactly. It means that truth, if it exists, is always seen through something, like sunlight through stained glass. The light is real, but the colors are shaped by the frame. Perhaps objective truth is not what we see, but what we agree to approach together. Not a fixed island, but a North Star. Something we aim for, knowing we may never fully arrive. We get glimpses of it when perspectives overlap, when multiple lenses converge on the same pattern, when math, observation, experience, and emotion all point to something that feels stable, less personal, more shared. And maybe that's enough. So, is there such a thing as objective truth? Maybe, but we never hold it in pure form. What we hold are versions, stories, models, some clearer than others, some closer than others, and truth isn't weakened by this. It becomes something we strive for, not something we possess, not a trophy on a shelf, but a horizon the mind is forever walking toward. What is the philosophy of mind? You can think, you can feel, you can imagine a distant future and recall a childhood memory in the same breath. You can reflect on your own thoughts. But have you ever stopped to ask, what exactly is all of this? That question, simple, impossible, essential, is the root of an entire branch of philosophy, the philosophy of mind. It's not about theories of behavior or diagnostic tools. It's not neuroscience or psychology, though it overlaps with both. It's the discipline that asks the hardest version of the simplest questions. What is a mind? What is consciousness? What does it mean to be something from the inside? At its core is the mind-body problem. How can something physical, the brain, give rise to something non-physical, experience? Why does neural activity come with the texture of joy, pain, memory, awareness? Why doesn't the brain just compute silently like a machine? This is where the major positions begin to unfold. Dualism, most famously proposed by Descartes, says the mind and body are two fundamentally different substances, the physical world and the world of experience. But if they're separate, how do they interact? Materialism says there's only one thing, matter. The mind is just what the brain does. But this leads to another question. If the brain is just firing neurons, why does it feel like anything to be you? Some philosophers argue that consciousness is emergent, a property that arises only when the brain becomes complex enough. Others lean toward functionalism, the idea that what matters isn't the material, but the pattern. If a system processes information in the right way, it has a mind, whether it's made of neurons, silicon, or something else entirely. Then there's panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is fundamental, not something that emerges from matter, but something that exists alongside it, everywhere. In this view, even atoms may carry a glimmer of awareness, and minds are just more organized expressions of it. Philosophy of mind also asks about qualia, the raw feel of experience, the redness of red, the taste of mint, the ache of missing someone. These aren't things we can measure. They're private, subjective, and yet they are the most undeniable parts of being alive. And then there's the self. Are you a fixed thing, or a process, an illusion, a story told in real time by the brain to maintain continuity? The philosophy of mind doesn't claim to have all the answers, but it gives you the framework to ask the questions precisely and to notice which ones bend under their own weight. So, what is the philosophy of mind? It's the scaffolding beneath every question you've ever had about thinking, feeling, dreaming, being. Not a map of the mind, but a mirror held up to it. What is dreaming mind? You close your eyes, the world goes quiet, and then, without warning, another world appears. You're flying, or falling,